Hey everyone, it's Simi Shah, and welcome to Trailblazers. On this podcast, I dive deep into the journeys of trailblazing South Asians, sharing the stories of the leaders and dreamers lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Before we jump into today's episode, I have a quick message for you guys from My Decorify. Look, the older we get, the harder it becomes to find ways to unleash our creative energy. But with their curated DIY art kits, My Decorify brings your next adult home decor art project straight to your door. Head to mydecorify.com today to get your very own DIY kit or to check out their incredible South Asian-inspired notebooks and prints. And of course, use the code Trailblazers30 for 30% off your first order. Now on to our episode. Season 4 is in full swing, and today I'm welcoming Sushma Dwivedi, Head of Communications and Brand Marketing at Daily Harvest and founder of the Purple Pundit Project. Sushma spent the early innings of her career with major global communications firms, including Edelman and Fleishman Hillard, focused specifically on the food and beverage space. In 2020, she joined Daily Harvest, a food startup that makes ready-to-blend smoothies, soups, and more, all with the intent of making healthy eating easier. In November of 2021, they raised their Series D at a valuation of $1 billion. But that's not all. Outside her day job, Sushma also officiates weddings as a Hindu priestess or pundit. To this end, she founded the Purple Pundit Project in 2016 to help more South Asians find pundits and officiants for their weddings. To date, she's officiated over 40 weddings, many of which have been between LGBTQ+ couples. Sushma, you're a trailblazer in so many realms, and this has been a long time coming. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. Thank you. It's a delight to be here and held amongst an incredible cast. You've had quite the roster of incredible South Asians over the course of the last year. I've been watching.
Well, I appreciate that a ton, and we are adding you to that roster today, so I'm so excited. But where I really want to start is with the latest and greatest news, and that is that Daily Harvest recently raised their Series D funding round at a valuation of $1 billion. Can you tell me about the excitement that occurred when that news hit and what the whirlwind has been like over the past couple of weeks and months?
Sure. I think any good comms person will tell you, when the news is coming, right? So being able to talk about it has actually been tremendous. And it's nice to see so much support coming up. But it's something we've been working towards for quite some time. Daily Harvest is a hair over 5 years old. We just had our 5th anniversary this past fall as well. And it's seen a pretty steady year-over-year growth since the very beginning. And we've been fighting the good fight, trying to get people to eat more fruits and vegetables. And this is definitely a nice testament to being able to do that a little bit more at scale.
Well, that's super exciting and a huge congratulations to you and your team. I've been following Daily Harvest for some time.
And have you tried the food?
I haven't.
Simi, send me your address. I will send you a box.
No, I appreciate that. I honestly need it. I mean, I eat out so much living in New York and just constantly being on the go that I've been meaning to try some of these meal kit plans, but I've often found that they're not very vegetarian friendly.
They're not. Yeah.
So Daily Harvest is going on my list. I will send you my address. Thank you.
Yeah, I will happily stock your freezer any day. And listen, it's not just you.
Yeah.
It's sort of the majority of people.
Yeah.
And everybody sort of has a hard time, I think, trying to get your fruits and vegetables in, right? So it's our small way of making it as easy as possible for more people to eat more fruits and vegetables every day.
Absolutely.
And you're right. Technically, we are vegan. It's not something we lean into very heavily when it comes to our marketing efforts, to be honest with you, mostly because we're not anti-meat or dairy. We're just very, very, very pro fruits and vegetables. So it's super fun. The food's delicious. The ice cream is bomb.
Oh, I didn't know you guys had ice cream.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We introduced ice cream called Scoops last summer. I recognize that we sort of sprung into pop culture mania with smoothies as sort of our core offering, but there's a lot of food and a lot more coming. So ice cream came last year along with flatbreads.
Wow.
Had a pretty robust offering of harvest bowls, which, by the way, for a person like you doing 20,000 things on a daily basis is an easy 4-minute lunch. And forayed into plant-based milk last year, have a couple of fun more innovations coming up over the course of the next few weeks. And we, there's nothing stopping us. So a lot more food to come. A lot more food to come, too.
That's super exciting to hear. So in that vein, I think something that I found interesting is we've seen that in the last 5 to 10 years alone, a lot of these future of food startups have popped up. I think one of the ones that immediately comes to mind is Blue Apron. And we've seen a lot of them get a really big start and then taper off or lose some of that momentum or just not be able to get off the ground in the first place. What compelled you to join Daily Harvest? What sold you on the company?
So a couple things. First of all, you're absolutely right. That's certainly been par for the course over the course of the last year in particular, or two, I guess, if you start to think about when, I don't remember when Blue Apron went public exactly. I've built my career in food and beverage. I started out, you're right, at Fleishman Hillard on the consumer marketing side of things. I moved to Edelman to focus on corporate reputation. I led the food and beverage sector in the New York office for quite some time. And it really gave me an in-depth understanding of the food landscape for both really, really big food. I've been embedded at PepsiCo more times than I can count over the course of my career. Worked with Chobani twice, worked with many different brands on the larger end of things, as well as smaller. Blue Apron was also a client at one point in time as well.
Wow.
What brought me to Daily Harvest was I had lunch with Rachel Drury, the CEO, and we honestly just mommed out for an hour. We have kids in similar age range. And as I started to learn more about all the food that was upcoming, my interest became increasingly piqued.
Okay.
Much like many people who sort of reach a certain stage of their career also, I was really looking to be more aligned with my own values on a daily basis. And knowing that Daily Harvest was a company that had been rooted from the very beginning in the practices of making sure that our food was organic and that we are moving towards regenerative farming practices and encouraging farmers to transition their land and pay for it on the company's dime from conventional to organic meant a lot to me. So sort of having that at the core, and I think as a marketer also, nothing here was going to be a make good.
Okay.
It wasn't like we had to go back and start a new approach that took farmer livelihoods into consideration because we'd been busting it up for 20 years first.
Yeah.
Much like a lot of more conventional large food or big food, if you will. So that felt really great to me. The charge here was very much add more shine to a really substantive company. And that's a marketer's dream.
Absolutely.
I will take that charge any day. It's been super fun, a wild ride over the course of almost 2 years for me.
Wow.
I highly encourage everybody to eat more fruits and vegetables. And if Daily Harvest can help you do that with ease and deliciousness, even I can sleep well at night.
Well, I'm convinced. So I will be trying it very soon. You can count on that.
You are. Box coming up for me. You bet. You bet.
So you spoke to the fact that you've had this extensive background in the food and beverage space, but it seems like this is your first time actually working for a brand rather than at a comms firm with a focus on F&B.
That is correct.
Why and how did you get your start at these sorts of agencies?
It kind of just happened. Sometimes I feel like you look at your life in reverse and they're all sort of happy accidents or just sort of materialize that way. I really liked agency life.
Okay.
There's an incredible energy to having a breadth of a portfolio and understanding a subject or a space with more than just one brand's vantage point. And that's one of the things I valued the most. And I will say being at Edelman in particular really gave me scope to be able to understand a wide range of issues that impact the food and beverage space in particular. I've taken a CEO to Davos.
Wow.
Surreal, totally amazing experience, right? I remember my first tour of duty with Chobani. It was under $100 million brand at the time. And the charge was very much educate the public on Greek yogurt.
Wow.
Remember that? When like nobody knew what it was?
What Greek yogurt was? Yeah.
Yeah. And then suddenly it was everywhere and in everything, right? And then fast forward, I forget how many, maybe 10 years later, I was now at Edelman leading the food and beverage sector in the New York office. And it was incorporating Hamdi's passion for refugees into it with the Tent Foundation and a lot more thought leadership. I don't know. I personally have always cared a lot about how you eat and what you eat. If you can't eat it or drink it, I don't know that I really care about it as like a brand to sort of engage with professionally. But it's really fun as a space to be in also. You can have a lot of fun in food.
Yeah, I believe it. I feel like so much of what I've heard from people broadly working in CPG, but of course food and beverage, is because it's something that everybody touches every day.
Totally.
It's something that just feels so relatable. And so being part of the back end process of selling it, marketing it, or just producing it, whatever it is, I think there's a special component there that you don't always get in other industries.
No, you really don't. Also, it's a universal love, right? Who doesn't love to talk about food?
Yeah.
Or like actually be in it otherwise. After I left Edelman, one of the most fun things I did was I went to the Culinary Institute of America for a little boot camp course. up in Poughkeepsie. And it was so nice to like get more deeply ingrained. I will never call myself a chef. All right. One little boot camp really isn't going to cut it, to say the least. But it was really nice to understand, I think, the broad spectrum of it all, too, from how food is grown, the role that pesticides play in all of the above. We look at it more from farm to fork. I find it highly enjoyable.
Okay. No, I love that, farm to fork.
Believe me, I didn't invent it. But
well, you always hear farm to table. I've never heard farm to fork, so I'm officially co-opting that today.
You're welcome to. You're welcome to.
So I'm curious, as you mentioned, you worked with these incredible clients while you were with Fleishman Hillard and Edelman, Chobani, Perdue Farms. Can you talk to me about some of the major projects you worked on and how they've informed the work that you do today at Daily Harvest?
Oh, sure. I think when you look, again, at your life in reverse, right? There's so many learnings you sort of glean along the way. I'm going to go probably in reverse.
Okay.
Working with Chobani in the first early stages gave me a good sense of how to educate, right? And how do you actually begin to educate consumers and really important stakeholders? In that case, with what is Greek yogurt? What are the benefits? Blah, blah, blah. We always had a really strong focus on registered dietitians, invaluable resource on really being able to help adopt the practice and being able to talk about nutritional benefits in a way that's more authentic and credible, right?
Absolutely.
Since then, I've certainly always incorporated registered dietitians into my marketing mix for many other brands accordingly. On the second tour, once we were sort of dealing with a lot more higher profile, the company was $1 billion by that point, I'm sure, but time is a flat circle, so don't quote me on the exact part of it all. It was really nice to take an issues lens and have a passionate point of view on how do you show up as a company to do some good, right? They gave shares to every one of their employees, manufacturing facilities up. And I think it was really great to be learning from the front lines of how CEOs have really navigated a lot of transition over the course of 5-10 years, and also how you transition your leadership, right, as your company grows, and use your platform as a position of power for more than just the business interests that may suit your profits on a daily basis. Wow. So I feel like I've gleaned a lot from those. You mentioned Perdue. It was early days for me, but I remember going on a chicken immersion. Wow. We were in Salisbury, Maryland at the Perdue Farms facility for a few days. And that was my first real foray into understanding how food is grown and farmed.
Wow.
And so we spent time in the chicken hatchery and sort of went through the entire process. And it ended with dinner with Jim Perdue.
Yeah.
And understanding all that goes into meat production in the States is kind of fascinating. I've worked with the dairy industry on several different occasions throughout my career, more closely, Chobani aside, both with Dannon and Dairy Manufacturers of America. I have such a high regard for all farmers everywhere. Wow. It's a really tough industry to be a part of.
Absolutely.
Blue Apron took me to the farms of California. I've got a deep understanding by now of honestly how the food system works. It's kind of disturbing. It was designed to really prioritize shelf-stable food.
Yeah.
If you look at all land in the United States, only 1% is organic of all farmable land. And of all croppable land in the United States, it's used to farm. 2% is used to farm fresh fruits and vegetables. The remaining 98% goes to corn and soy. So it's kind of eye-opening. No wonder it's so hard to eat fruits and vegetables every day.
Hey, I honestly say that. It's like, even if you want to, even just sussing out what ingredients are in certain products and discovering that something that you thought is healthy actually isn't. And there's the whole question around labeling going on right now. I just find it so fascinating.
Don't get me started on labeling. That's a cocktail conversation.
It's just crazy. But it sounds like you've developed so much expertise in this arena over the course of first working with the agencies and now Daily Harvest. I'm curious why you decided to make that transition. Were you actively looking to go in-house with the brand, or was it happenstance?
Honestly, happenstance. Like I said, I loved agency life.
Yeah.
And I think when you are on the consulting side of things in an agency environment, there's always this sense of you should do this until you graduate and go in-house, right?
Interesting.
And that's it. And then you stay in-house. And now that I have been there, I don't know that it's so binary. I wouldn't rule out a return at some point, just as I equally wouldn't rule out another tour of duty with another brand at a different time. I think it's a lot more fluid. But no, it sort of just happened.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the pundit in me, but I am a firm believer in life takes you where you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
And this is where I ended up. And I'm thrilled that it's been such a formative time in both the company's history and also just in humanity, right? You feel a lot better about helping people eat fruits and vegetables and having it go straight to their home over the course of pandemic life, to say the least. My first day at Daily Harvest was March 3rd, 2020.
Wow. So basically a week before we went into lockdown.
Yeah, pretty much. And I am the company's first head of comms. So I walked into basically crisis planning of like business continuity and sort of figuring it all out. And I had 6 days in our very cool office before we all went remote. And it's been a fascinating ride ever since. Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. Super, super interesting. To that end, can you speak to some of the challenges of being a comms person? I just feel like, you know, what it is now versus I'm sure even what it was 10 years ago, just given the number of channels we have of communication with the public, the ability for misinformation to spread. Can you speak to managing that? Speak to how you feel like your role has evolved over the extent of your career?
Yeah, I think that we now live in a 24/7 news cycle for sure.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. And I think the need for really tight messaging as a brand has never been higher. The need for making sure that you have integrated marketing efforts so that all your messages are consistent across different channels and platforms. When I started, just use my tenure at Daily Harvest as an example, TikTok wasn't yet a thing.
Yeah.
And then it was. And we ventured on very early and took a leap as like, hey, we could probably have some fun here and have had some great success on TikTok in particular. Gave Clubhouse a go. Not as great for us. But if you think about it in terms of like, how do you manage all different channels? And also as things evolve and emerge, we're a food brand. Do you want to hear food and like words, or do you want to see, look, touch, feel? Exactly. Right. So some of them as channels may evolve and emerge, and it's great to test and learn, right? And sort of understand where you can have more fun or what plays to your strengths more. I don't believe that you have to be everywhere just for the sake of being everywhere.
Okay.
I think it's really smart to think about what plays to your core ethos as a brand and why and how you leverage that channel. But comms is an all-encompassing thing. I take managing a company's reputation very strongly. I take it personally. So
wow. Well, it's probably why you're good at your job.
I like to think so. I also think it's not for everyone, right?
Yeah.
You have to know that about yourself too. I love the news. I love to be in the news. I love to shape the news. You know, I like to connect with people. I like to tell stories. It's very much intrinsic to how I feel like I approach all marketing efforts more broadly. So it's fun for me. Yeah. And the day that it stops being fun, I probably won't do it anymore. Yeah. And now that doesn't mean all of it is unicorns and fairies, certainly. The downside is obviously the 24/7 news cycle. The last year and a half in particular have been a massive dumpster fire. Navigating through last summer for everybody, in particular from a comms lens, was emotionally taxing, in particular as a person of color. Those are responsibilities I also take pretty strongly. It's not a light load.
Yeah. I feel like that's an important thing to highlight. A big part of the conversations I try to have on this podcast are shedding light on the pros and cons of any career. Totally. But I found that the people that are truly passionate about their roles on a day-to-day basis or from a big picture lens feel the pros outweigh the cons on a given day. Every career is going to have its ups and downs, parts of the job that are particularly difficult. But the point is that in the overall, you're having a lot more fun.
Absolutely. And you should be. I'm a big believer in your life is bigger than your job.
Yes.
But we spend so much time working. You should love what you do every day.
Absolutely. You know? Absolutely. That's why Trailblazers exist. We're here to provide young South Asians a line of sight to leaders who look like them and can shed some light on whether it's a career pursuit that actually interests them in the long term.
Well, listen, I got to tell you, I have a relatively conservative Eastern UP Brahmin family, right? I can assure you nobody was a comms person.
Yeah. So I want to back into that. You said so much of this was lucky encounters, things that just happened to materialize. But was there an inciting moment where you were like, I think this is it?
I did my undergrad at McGill, and I had a double major of psych and communication. I think it was always sort of storytelling for me. Look, it would have been some facet of marketing. In retrospect, I probably would have picked some lane of it all. And comms just sort of happened in that. I think when I was thinking about other portions to entertain, certainly blanket brand marketing was part of it. And, you know, right now at Daily Harvest, I lead communications and brand marketing as an integrated function. And I like it that way. It was one of the best parts about being at Edelman is really understanding how to strongly unite different siloed components to tell a stronger story and help position a brand more strongly. It's been a powerful tool. But I don't know that I ever had like one sort of epiphany moment. I will say I had an internship with the Montreal Canadiens hockey team.
Okay.
And it was super cool. And at the time, do you remember Any Given Sunday?
I do not.
It's so before your time. I'm totally going to date myself. But it was this movie with like Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz.
Okay.
And It's a sports family and they own a football team. And Cameron Diaz is the central figure of like inheriting the team. And I was like, this is it. I'm going to be a woman in sports. It will be amazing, but it will be hockey because I'm from Montreal and that's what we do.
My gosh.
We play hockey. And I have very fond memories of growing up with my grandparents and my dadaji watching hockey on TV, muting it because it was in French, but listening to the play-by-play in English on the radio.
Oh my gosh.
So it's always been a core part of life. And then I think like my first few games where I was like, oh man, you have to travel with the team. It's life. It is totally all-encompassing. Kind of kicked me off the sports PR train pretty fast, and I found my way into food.
Wow. I love that. I love that so much. I want to peel back some of the layers on what you actually do on a day-to-day basis because, to your point, in a lot of different organizations, sometimes these roles are very siloed. They mean different things. Can you peel back what it means for you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, any given day for me can involve a conversation with a reporter, an analysis of how our social media posts are performing, definitely some work with our CEO, close collaboration with our creative department and our performance marketing team to see how our channels are working and whether our creative is out there. So a lot of sort of like ebb and flow and interplay, right? Which is, I think, one of the best parts of the job is that you actually get to do a lot more. And I think that also varies by how big the company is that you work in, right? So to your point about silos and understanding the nuances of sort of how to build it differently and better when you have the opportunity to build it yourself, it kind of depends on how big the entity is that you're supporting. I have been embedded at PepsiCo 3 times throughout my career.
Yeah.
And that's a behemoth.
Absolutely.
Right? So a little harder, I would imagine, to integrate comms and marketing teams to be fluid and nimble and a little bit more agile than it is at Daily Harvest, where we've certainly grown fast and have hired 150 people over the course of the last 2 years, but we're still under 300 team members.
Wow.
Yeah, not the same.
And how do you think it differs, particularly being at a startup? Obviously, you guys are later stage, having just raised the Series D, but I'm curious, what are some of the key indicators that are very different in a comms and brand marketing role within this sort of company versus, like you said, something like PepsiCo, which has been around for decades?
You'll be able to optimize channels and messaging a lot more on the startup side. One of my favorite episodes of your podcast was with Nick Sharma.
Yeah.
Love Nick. Subscribe to his newsletter. Everybody should, especially if you're a marketer. He's fantastic. Lots of key learnings. But the ability to help navigate all your channels nimbly and figure out how best to leverage what portion of the marketing mix at what moment in time, I think is a really unique opportunity about working at a startup. If I was in a traditional comms role at, let's just run with PepsiCo because we've been talking about it, I'm pretty certain I'd be very busy. And I'm pretty certain I certainly have a meaningful role, but it would largely be focused entirely on sole communication, right? On like communications as the art and practice of it all, because the company's simply that big. There's enough work to do there. I'm not suggesting I don't have enough work to do at Daily Harvest, but the ability to sort of blur lines and build it all for a more integrated marketing mix, I think is a little easier.
Super, super interesting. In that realm, I mean, you've had this incredible evolution over the course of your career. And I think what's so fascinating about your role is the fact that it is one that I would guess has to evolve more than the average other C-suite role. I mean, you take something like CFO, the way you do accounting has largely stayed the same. The way you do brand marketing has not.
Sure.
I'm curious what advice you have for young comms professionals who aspire to chart a career path not unlike yours.
Well, first and foremost, if you're a young comm professional, hit me up on LinkedIn and I will I'm always happy to mentor, right? I've been very fortunate to have strong mentors above me, and I'm a big believer in paying that forward. So hit me up. Happy to add to my totally non-existent roster. I don't know. No one wants to talk to me, I guess.
I don't believe that. You wouldn't be on this podcast if that were true.
But read up and stay sharp. You want to be a textbook communicator for what? It's not going to last. There's a beauty and an art and a science to being a really savvy comms person. It requires being obsessed with the news, and sort of understanding news cycles and how they trend and how to break into that. Make friends with your reporters.
Yeah.
Get to know what they're interested in. And that was one of the best learnings out of agency life also, is really understanding how to cut through some clutter. I'm a big believer in you want to build marketing campaigns that will lead to news coverage. A central nucleus that has buzz factor that people will want to talk about. That usually requires it to have a universal human truth that's breaking into the cultural zeitgeist in some way, that offers something insightful that only the entity that you're representing, whether it's Daily Harvest or anyone else, can sort of uniquely offer. But if you're doing it right, all of it should lead to more buzz.
Absolutely. I feel like you just handed me a guide, so thank you.
I'm happy to give you a guide any day. You want to add yourself to my list?
Yes. Count me on the roster. So I have to shift gears to the Purple Pundit Project, which I think is just so intriguing and amazing. And I know it all began with your husband's sibling. So for the sake of our listeners, do you mind recounting the genesis story?
Sure, happy to. I'm always happy to tell our own origin tale. So like I mentioned, I'm from Montreal, and my family's Eastern UP Brahmin. We're from Lucknow and Gorakhpur and Allahabad. And my husband's from the Jersey Shore. We met here in New York at Blondie's, which is a sports bar on the Upper West Side, as one does.
Watching hockey, no doubt.
Almost, actually. Yeah, almost. We met at a happy hour. And he has 2 siblings, and one of them is transgendered. And when we got married, that was, I think, the first time that I had ever really, sadly, noticed how hard it would be to obtain a pandit if you were Hindu and LGBTQ.
Yeah.
I think somewhere I may have naively at the time assumed can't be a thing. Why would it be a thing? And it slowly became obvious to us that we were really misinformed and had sort of made some assumptions ourselves. So I'm a big believer in the universe speaks to you in whispers until it gets so loud that you just can't ignore it. And that was the first time that I feel like there was a little voice in the back of my head that was sort of like, that's whack. Why is the only reason Vivek and I could have a pundit so easily because we're straight? That's not cool.
Yeah.
So I got ordained on the interwebs at the time and sort of left it at that. And I didn't really do much more with it until a few years later. In 2016, when the world was on fire once again, we had our first child, Ashwin, who's now 5. And I saw LGBTQ rights being threatened for the first time in my lifetime. And I could not bear the idea of my son growing up in a universe where everybody was not equal and didn't have equal access or rights. So at that time, I went and founded Purple Pundit Project and did a little bit more digging. And I talked to my grandmother, who's thankfully, knock on wood, still alive. And I said, hey, Amma, I had this idea. I feel like I want to help people from the LGBTQ community get married. And she's 87, right? So I figured there might be a little pushback. And to her credit, she was extremely supportive and was like, that's what we do. Wow. We are pundits. This is what we do. So I said, okay. But to be clear, this is where I want to focus, right? So can you help me? And she did. And the way that she put it, this was like the thing we would have done back in the home country. Pass it down to the next generation to carry the torch. Yeah. Just as she and my grandfather had certainly been passed along rights and funded things along the way generationally. So she helped me contemporize, sort of a suite of rituals, if you will. I got a wedding ceremony down to about a 35-minute science. Wow. And then I just started to spread the word grassroots. I didn't really do much with it, broadly speaking. I just had my first kid, but I did start to reach out to a couple of LGBTQ South Asian groups, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. And when I started to conduct a little outreach and I was like, can you add me to like your roster of pundits and like to the database? And they were like, yeah, sure. It's just you.
That's amazing.
Kind of, but I was also like, wait, what do you mean? I thought there would be like, a bunch of more progressive folk. And I think that there are, but possibly just in smaller pockets, right? And it may be a little harder to uncover necessarily. So that was 2016. And then fast forward to 2018 in a complete fluke incident. I ended up officiating a wedding in the hospital while I was in labor with my second kid.
And this is the wildest thing I think I've ever seen in the history of the podcast.
I mean, it'll never happen again. It was totally surreal and one of those moments where I feel like I was floating outside my body and I had a choice, right? I could either help this couple. Basically what happened was I was in the hospital in labor with Nayan, our second child, who is now 3. And it was like a May evening and it was around midnight. And I actually think that the anesthesiologist who was coming to give me an epidural was just trying to make conversation. So they're like, hey, it's kind of noisy on the floor tonight. Lots of babies coming into the world. We're like, what's going on? And they said, well, we're trying to find the hospital chaplain. I said, how come? And They said that there was a couple 2 doors down who went to City Hall to get their marriage license, and then her water broke.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't know this at the time, but I guess there are different birth certificate implications if you're legally married at the time of child's birth or not.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so, yeah, me neither. I don't think anyone does, So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. This is totally random. But listen, if you can't find the chaplain, I could do it. I'm ordained. And she kind of just laughed me off and was like, oh, that's really sweet. And it is weird because you're in labor too. So that's cute, but sure. She sort of just patted me on the head and was like, okay, needle done, blah, blah. And 10 minutes later, a very sheepish looking resident walked into my hospital room and was like, Sushma, we haven't met yet, but I hear you can officiate weddings. Is that right? And I was like, yeah, what's going on? And she said that they found the hospital chaplain and he wasn't ordained.
Oh my gosh.
So he couldn't legally marry them. And so she was like, now you by no means have to do this because, again, you are also in labor. But I figured you mentioned it. We thought we would just see what was feasible. And I asked my OB who came back into the room at that point, and I was like, how far away am I from actually giving birth? And he was like, at least 4 hours. And I was like, I can do this. I can do this.
Crazy.
Totally. But you know what was amazing, Simi? The staff, and I gave birth at Cornell on the Upper East Side in New York, was so wonderful. The nurses completely turned into a little wedding planner factory. Okay. One of them wrote a poem that she read as a reading. Okay. Somebody else made a floral wreath for the bride's hair, who is in her hospital gown, right? Because she's in labor. Like her water is broken. My legs were numb by this point, so I couldn't move. And so they had everybody come into my room and just elevate my bed up as like Jabba the Hutt, essentially.
Oh my gosh.
So they all came in and we had a beautiful ceremony. Wow. Lots of tears, lots of laughs, craziest thing ever. And to our earlier conversation about life working in happenstance sort of ways, coming out of that, I was like, listen, I know we're both about to go have our babies now. And we obviously made friends with the couple. But I am a PR person by day, and I'm going to want to tell someone about this because this is a crazy story. So we traded info, and I did, in fact, tell the story afterwards, and it went viral. And from that, actually, I gave a few interviews with bridal publications, and that led to an uptick in the pundit biz.
Wow.
So to date, I've actually performed 42 weddings.
Wow.
Probably 5 baby namings, 2 mundans, and 1 restaurant opening for Sona in New York City.
Wow.
And it's been surreal. What I think you might find interesting is I fully went into this thinking that the majority of folks that I was working with would be LGBTQ.
Yeah.
They're not. It's been a pretty 50-50 split. It's a very small niche of people for sure. But it's certainly a demographic, at least I think folks of our generation, who are looking for more inclusive punditry, right? More contemporary understanding, being able to have it be relevant to them and applicable to their day-to-day lives. And also just have an approach that's a little bit more simplified. So it's been super fun. It's so rewarding. It brings me so much joy.
Wow.
And it's a privilege to be a part of someone's love story or their child's birth. It's so amazing.
What an amazing journey to starting this business, and what a beautiful and powerful mission. It's amazing. I saw the video, I read the New York Times article, and I remember thinking, like, of all the side hustles, who would ever imagine? And it's truly incredible. So a huge congrats to you.
Oh, yeah.
Something I want to ask about, because we had talked about it in passing. I know when the New York Times piece came out, you faced a lot of criticism because, unsurprisingly, for many adherents of the Hindu religion and within the South Asian community, gay marriage is still a pretty taboo thing, or it can be in many spaces. And also because many people are not used to seeing female pundits. It's a very male-dominated space. And so I know when this huge piece came out, you faced a lot of criticism. And I'm curious, as someone who's used to operating in the brand marketing sphere in the public arena, how did you grapple with all this criticism?
It's nuts. I think as a communicator, the comms person in me absolutely knew that this is going to be a 48-hour news cycle. All right. It'll go up online. I got so much haterade
Oh my
And
gosh.
then it came up in print and I got a lot more haterade. And every bone in my body knew that just let it be and it will die, right? The trolling on Twitter, they will move on to something else in time. But the human in me was like dying to go battle with every human being throwing any vitriol out there and defend myself. And I didn't do it, mostly because I didn't want to extend that news cycle any further. But it was really hard. I'd be lying if I said it rolled right off my back. It did not. I spent many a sleepless night that week and shed many a tear. And the flip side is I also saw an overwhelming amount of support. And that's what kept me going. It was really wonderful to then receive notes of support from, I want to say, largely younger South Asians who were like, listen, this sucks, but you're fighting the good fight.
I agree.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It really sucks when you think you're doing something good.
Yeah.
I also saw a lot of support from, and this is sort of fascinating as a turn of events, from Reform rabbis.
Wow.
It's kind of cool. Who reached out and were like, shalom, sister. We have been where you are. And it's tough. And please keep doing what you're doing. Please don't let it scare you off. We've been there. It's tough to ride the wave, but everybody deserves more inclusive religion. And, you know, one day we hope to partner on a Hindu wedding together.
That's
I've got a little
amazing.
posse now of like, I've made some rabbi friends. I'm dying for more Bundit friends, but I haven't made any yet.
They're coming. They're coming.
I hope so. And I do think that, you know, everyone sort of exists in different pockets.
Yeah.
But my ultimate goal is honestly to just be rendered completely obsolete. I don't think you should have to say progressive, inclusive, Bundit.
Yeah.
Those things should just be synonymous.
implicit.
Yeah, exactly. It should be implicit. And change doesn't happen overnight, right? So if this is as far as I can get this, and I will keep fighting the good fight for as long as I can, maybe by the next generation, it'll be a different ballgame.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I think it's an incredibly powerful initiative. And to be frank, part of why it was so surprising is because I'm obviously a young South Asian. It's not even something that would occur to me as something that's needed. But I'm sure it's so meaningful to so many different people in the community and is going to set a precedent going forward. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, Simi, I think we live in a universe of multi-hyphenates, right? And lots of people do more than one thing on a daily basis. And what I found particularly meaningful in being able to carve my own niche out is, listen, I knew it was going to be serving a very small portion of the population, but I knew it was something I could uniquely do. And I think it's really important for anyone listening, right, to just think about how you can serve. Everyone has a unique skill set. What is the thing that only you could do to help make the world a little bit better than you found it?
That resonates a ton on so many different levels on the point of being a multi-hyphenate in a world where I don't think that's always expected or welcomed at the same time, and trying to put energy into the atmosphere based on the skills and energy and passions that you have, which is part of the reason Trailblazers is what it is today. I don't know, it makes me feel good about what I'm putting out to the universe and operates very much in parallel with what you're working on with Purple Bundit. So thank you for sharing that.
I think it's really amazing that you've created a platform for people to break outside the box. One of the things I found most enlightening about all the rest of your guests, and I'm so humbled to be among them at all, is there's a really wide variety of people. Gone are the days of the only interesting South Asian you were going to talk to was a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer.
Exactly.
Right? And it's really cool in that sense.
Yeah.
So thank you for creating a space.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for coming on. I think what's so powerful for me even is before I even started this podcast is seeing the range.
Yeah.
And you exemplify that in so many ways. I mean, here you are working as a comms person by day and as a Bundit at night. And just seeing the ways in which you've fused your South Asian heritage into all of this, it's really inspiring.
That's so kind of you to say.
The last question I have for you in that realm is, you know, it really feels like you're someone who's embraced your identity, embraced your skill sets, your passion for storytelling. How has your identity as a South Asian, as a woman of color in these various spaces, obviously we talked about it in the realm of being a Bundit, but also in the world of comms, how has it impacted your work and career and your outlook on your work going forward?
Ooh, great question. It's evolved, certainly. I would hope anyone would say that their identity has sort of evolved over the years. So by way of background, my family is second generation. My grandparents came to Canada so my grandfather could get his PhD. And I technically grew up in rural French Quebec, where I can assure you there was nobody else of color. But Canada is a really wonderful place to be an immigrant. At least it was when I was growing up, right? So while I certainly didn't have many friends who looked like me, or any really, other than like our family friends, it allowed me to have a comfortable sense of an identity and be a multi-hyphenate from the beginning, right? So English, French, and Hindi came to me at the same time. Most of my friends from undergrad, from McGill, no matter what their ethnic background, all spoke a heritage language, Italian, Arabic, whatever it was, Greek.
Wow.
It wasn't until I moved to the States, actually, until I noticed that wasn't necessarily the case for people growing up here. And it was a very interesting dichotomy, I think, in that sense. I think living in New York City certainly opened my eyes to a lot more multitudes of backgrounds, but the fluidity of it all seemed a little bit more stifled. I'll use my husband as an example. I think he introduced himself to me as Vivek. And I was like, I think your name is Vivek. And, he grew up on the shore, and his father was in the military, and assimilating into American culture certainly he doesn't speak any Hindi. Now, over the course of 20 years of living, in New York City, I'm 40, I have 2 kids. I've come to terms in a way not to tolerate, but rather to accept and celebrate being a woman of color. And that's taken a lot of work, I would say. In particular, having had a largely corporate background professionally, right? I don't know anybody who hasn't experienced a little low-key sexism, low-key racism, being the token, having the burden sort of put on you to solve all the world's problems as a person of color. And it's taken me a really long time to sort of own my own voice and own my truth. I think the abundant part of it has really helped me stay clear on my own values and feeling empowered to live my values every day.
I love that so much. And once again, I see the parallels. I think for me personally, Trailblazers is a side project, but it helps me stay true to my values in the professional context of my career, because you're able to fuse something that you love with the thing that you do every day, which I love my job, but it's still my job.
Totally.
So that resonates a ton. I skipped ahead of myself. I do have one more question for you. What's next for you?
Oh, man. I don't know. A lot more of this, I hope.
Yeah.
I would like to be able to spend more time in whatever the next phase of my career is, helping a lot more Black and brown founders and CEOs bring their companies into the same foray and conversational dialogue, household names, right? As the experience has been for me so far with the likes of Chobani and Daily Harvest and others. On the abundance front, we got a lot more work to do, sister.
I'm here to help.
Yeah. So I think both of those things are equally prevalent and important to me as a person. And I'll keep doing both. You got to be able to use your strengths. And I do feel like these are my gifts.
Absolutely.
I don't have many others. And so I got to use them. You got to use them in your time on Earth. And I do believe in trying to have as much impact and change as many lives as you can in the limited time that we have on this planet together. So a lot more to come, I suppose.
Well, I'm excited to see all that comes. Thank you for sharing your gifts, not just with the world, but here on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I've followed you for so long, but having the opportunity to sit face to face and understand who you are and your story is just truly inspiring. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sushma.
Oh, thank you for having me, Simi. And thank you for creating a wonderful platform for more South Asians to learn from each other.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you want to get new episodes straight to your inbox, subscribe to our newsletter at southasiantrailblazers.com and follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.